I'm just saying it like it is. You shouldn't be rude to others, you know. My name is Emma. I'm a 30-year-old working professional. I can't complain about my married life with Ethan, who's great at sharing the household chores. However, the thorn in my side has always been my mother-in-law and her daughter Emily, who live close by. My mother-in-law has been on her own since her husband, my father-in-law, passed away a few years ago, and now she and Emily live together. While mother-in-law works part-time, Emily has a full-time job. Emily is 37, single, and so similar to her mom in both looks and temperament that you might mistake one for the other from behind. Both of them are especially fond of my husband, who's the youngest and the only son in the family, so they're usually tough on me. From the moment we visited their home to announce our engagement, it was clear that neither mother-in-law nor Emily were my biggest fans. At that point, I was already hesitant about having to interact with them in the future, and was wondering if my love for Ethan would be enough to deal with it. However, I took the plunge into marriage because Ethan promised to always be there for me. Right after we got married, it became a weekly ritual to visit the in-laws where mother-in-law and Emily would ignore me as if I didn't exist, all the while acting as if they were enjoying a perfect, family-only gathering. After enduring this for about 3 months, I had reached my breaking point. One day, I grabbed Ethan's arm and dragged him to the front door, shooting a glare at mother-in-law and Emily who were following us, shouting. We left their house, and once we were safely away, I broke down in tears and told Ethan how deeply their actions were affecting me. Ethan, bless his heart, hadn't even noticed the emotional bullying because he's such a laid-back and carefree person. His attempts to placate me without understanding the core issues only made me angrier, and I gave him the silent treatment for the rest of the day. The next evening, Ethan came home late from work and immediately bowed his head in apology. Apparently, after discussing last night's events with his coworkers, they were unanimous in their disapproval and gave him a bit of scolding during lunch. He admitted that at first, he was surprised everyone was siding with me, but after listening to their opinions, he began to see that his mom and sister were indeed out of line. Feeling grateful for the enlightenment from Ethan's coworkers, I reflected on the possibility that I hadn't been the most mature person in the situation either. Then Ethan picked up the phone to call his mother. The last time my husband yelled, "Emma is an important person who joined our family, so don't you dare disrespect her," I had a newfound respect for him. Mother-in-law and Emily said that they wanted to apologize, but honestly, I would rather they just left me alone. However, respecting my husband's feelings, who understood mine, I reluctantly accepted their apologies. For appearances, we made up. All was quiet for a while until my husband got an invitation from mother-in-law to go out for dinner. I wasn't thrilled about it, but agreed to go anyway. When we met mother-in-law and Emily after a long time, they seemed overly cheerful. But the moment my husband went to the restroom, Emily said, "Oh, you're here too? Even though you're an outsider? I told my brother today was a family-only dinner." And then mother-in-law chimed in, "Oh really? An outsider is here? Well, what's done is done. Mom, if you say things like that, you'll get scolded by Ethan again. It sounds like we're harassing her. Emma? Sorry. We just say what's on our mind. Don't mind us." Emily smirked, just like her mother. They were ignoring me like I was invisible just a short time ago. Now this? I've learned that people who claim to be frank are usually the opposite. Mother-in-law and Emily kept emphasizing the word outsider, clearly unhappy about being reprimanded by my husband. Ah, a change in tactics, I see. I quickly understood their intent. If they can't ignore me, they'll use their words to push me away. Whether they had a strategy meeting or were in sync, this mother-daughter duo was very much alike. On the dinner table, mother-in-law, Emily, and my husband had matching bowls and chopsticks, while I was given worn-out dishes and disposable chopsticks. "Sorry, we thought this was a family-only dinner, so we didn't prepare for outsiders," mother-in-law said, forcing a smile. My husband sharply retorted, "Mom, did you forget to prepare for Emma, or is this intentional?" Caught off guard, mother-in-law stammered, I just forgot to buy it." Quickly, Emily also apologized, but the moment my husband turned away, she glared at me. As we began eating, Emily suddenly stood up and announced, "I have some news today. I'm getting married." Seeing the surprise on my face and my husband's, mother-in-law gleefully said, "He's such a wonderful person, you know. He's got an impressive job, so I thought it's fine to approve of this relationship." It was as if she was bragging about her own love life. Emily's boyfriend is a salesman from a company that her office deals with. He was charmed by Emily's efficiency at work and asked her out. In reality, Emily is a career woman who looks good in a suit. At first glance, she appears to be highly talented, so the story seems believable. "I've never had issues getting married, you know," Emily continued. "It's just that my personality is so straightforward, almost masculine, that guys are intimidated by me. Oh, I'm so jealous of Emma. Emma is, you know, the type guys want to protect. Like she can't live without a man. She just radiates that vibe. Ethan has always been weak for that type, so I'm really jealous. I don't have a manipulative bone in my body." Emily went on. "He's the type who can see the real me, you know? He thinks I'm cool. Right, Mom?" "Absolutely," mother-in-law chimed in. "And besides, he's not the type to tattle on my son with paranoid accusations, so I can relax. When you get married, I'll move in with you, of course." As joyous and celebratory as they were, mother-in-law and Emily didn't miss a beat in belittling me. I was so taken aback that I was at a loss for words. Mother-in-law then added, "Our family is growing again. Ethan, you should come back too. Life is better when it's just family." Emily quickly replied, "Mom, that's terrible. But you, Ethan, and I can say anything because we're family. But Emma is an outsider. It's rude to say such things." To which mother-in-law also said, "You're right. It's rude to an outsider. Sorry." I was so frustrated I had to fight back tears. Just then, my husband calmly put down his chopsticks and muttered, "This family is messed up." He stood up, ignored mother-in-law and Emily who tried to follow us, left his parents' home, and put me in the car. Inside the car, my husband said, "I'm really sorry." "As long as you understand, that's all that matters," I replied. I couldn't meet his gaze, and tears followed. Several nights later, mother-in-law and Emily showed up at our doorstep unannounced. "I'm so sorry. I know it's irrational, but I felt like you stole my son. And that just got under my skin. Please forgive me." "I'm sorry too. I have a soft spot for my younger brother, and I took it out on you," they both said, bowing deeply in apology at our front door. Confused by the sudden turn of events, I looked over at my husband, who seemed just as bewildered as I was. I couldn't shake the feeling that they had some ulterior motive, so I wasn't ready to forgive and forget so quickly. "If something like this happens again, I don't think I'll be able to forgive you," I warned them. "We get it, we really do," they both echoed, bowing their heads once more. Even after mother-in-law and Emily left, I felt uneasy, but my husband looked relieved. Looks like they finally get it. If only that were true. Maybe Emily's upcoming wedding changed her. Perhaps, once she's a daughter-in-law too, she'll get where I'm coming from and make an effort to get along. Trying to convince myself, I pushed down my lingering doubts. Turns out, all my concerns were unwarranted. Mother-in-law and Emily became noticeably nicer to me. When Emily introduced her fiancé, the dinner went off without a hitch. No passive-aggressive comments or anything. Her fiancé seemed as genuine as Emily claimed, a really good guy. Thinking her change of heart might be his influence, I genuinely celebrated her upcoming wedding. Then, mother-in-law asked for my help preparing meals for my father-in-law's memorial service, where many relatives would gather. I would have dreaded this before, but I felt differently about my in-laws now and agreed to stay overnight for cleanup. The morning of the event, I felt a slight headache and some chills. I had no fever, but I didn't want to risk spreading a cold, so I consulted with mother-in-law. She urged me to come, promising she'd also take precautions, so I headed over. When I got there, nearly 20 relatives had gathered. After the memorial service, my husband got called back to work due to some emergency. He left in a hurry, and I stayed at my in-laws' home, serving tea and snacks to guests. The post-service dinner was lively. I was bustling around, carrying drinks and food, and doing the dishes. When I glanced around the living room, I noticed my mother-in-law deep in conversation with relatives her own age. Emily, meanwhile, was busy with her phone and had disappeared into her room. Several female relatives on my father-in-law's side helped out, but neither my mother-in-law nor Emily lifted a finger. By the time it got dark, the party was over and the relatives left, although a few of the men had passed out from too much drinking. I was alone in the quiet living room, cleaning up in the kitchen. I had been too busy to think about it earlier, but my headache and chill from the morning had come back. I started to feel dizzy and thought about calling it a night and going home. Just then, my mother-in-law and Emily came into the living room. The moment our eyes met, my mother-in-law said, "Oh, you're still here? You're not very efficient, are you?" She continued, "Well, why don't you just go home? You've been itching to leave, haven't you?" The rest is family time. Ethan will be back soon, and we don't need outsiders like you around. What do you mean? As I asked, Emily started laughing. You still don't get it, do you? You're just a maid here. How funny! Ethan is part of my and my mom's family, not yours. But hey, you've been entertaining. We'll call you again to be our maid. Confused by Emily's contradictions, I asked, if I'm an outsider, then what does that make your fiancé? Emily retorted, what? He's family because I chose him. Just because you're not wanted here doesn't mean he's an outsider. Seriously? You're so clueless. Rolling her eyes, my mother-in-law chimed in. We've told you you can go. Why don't you take those drunk guys with you on your way out? She gestured with her hand as if shooing me away. This is the third time this has happened. I was livid, both at myself for being deceived twice, and at the two of them. The urge to throw whatever was close to me overwhelmed me. Yet, I was so dizzy I couldn't speak, and their mocking faces looked distorted. Feeling my body temperature rise rapidly, I stopped cleaning and stormed out of my in-laws' house. Only a few steps out, I started feeling extremely dizzy, and my knees gave out. I collapsed right there. That's when Susan, a neighbor I'd seen a few times, rushed over frantically. Hey, are you okay? She cradled me and spoke to me. In my fading consciousness, I muttered, Please, mother-in-law, Emily, let me rest, and then blacked out. I thought I heard her scream, but then I lost consciousness and I don't remember what happened next. When I woke up, I was in a hospital bed. Susan had called an ambulance in a panic, and people from the neighborhood had gathered around my in-laws' house. Apparently, I had a fever close to 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and it was said that it could have been much worse had help arrived any later. Turning to my husband, who was crying by my bedside, I asked, Who's your family? And then I went back to sleep. After being discharged, my husband and I visited my in-laws' house at my request. I had made up my mind during my recovery. Mother-in-law yelled at me, You ruined your father-in-law's memorial service, but I was calm. I told my husband, This is the third time they've harassed me. I can't take it anymore. What do you want to do? If you can't cut ties with your mother and sister, then we should go our separate ways. Who's your family? Without hesitation, he said it was me. Mother-in-law and Emily were momentarily shocked, but Emily, Who's your family? That's laughable. Don't worry, Ethan will come to his senses and come back. Right, Mom? Mother-in-law also laughed, but my husband stood up and declared, That day will never come. He held my hand tightly, and we left my in-laws' house behind. I went to Susan's house to thank her for taking care of me on the way home. On my way, everyone I met said, Are you okay? You've been through a lot. For a moment, I was puzzled, but figured the incident must have created quite a stir in the neighborhood. Susan greeted me with a smile and eagerly shared some news. She told me that the moment I was taken away in the ambulance, rumors spread like wildfire about my in-laws being terrible people who were overworking their sick daughter-in-law. Now, nobody even greets my mother-in-law and Emily. And guess what? The story that I saved your life has also spread. Isn't that something? She said, laughing. From her tone and lively expression, I was certain she was the one who'd spread the rumors. She's probably recounting it like some kind of heroic tale. Actually, in that moment when I was losing consciousness, I felt like it was my only chance to expose mother-in-law and Emily. So I made my stand. The truth is, I simply left because they told me to, but since I was really sick, karma hit them in the most unexpected way. But in reality, they must have been really shocked when they saw me collapse in front of them, still wearing my apron. I felt immensely grateful towards Susan. Oddly enough, despite being ignored by the neighbors, mother-in-law and Emily seemed to act as if nothing had changed. I found it puzzling, but decided it didn't matter since I didn't need to understand them anymore. I thanked Susan and headed home. By the time I was feeling better, my husband suggested we move since we might continue to be harassed if we stayed close. I immediately agreed, happy with his decision. Just when I thought it was all over, something more surprising happened. As we were preparing for the move, the doorbell rang. Standing there was Emily's fiancé, bowing his head through the monitor. We invited him in. After taking a deep breath, he said that the engagement was off, and he slowly began to explain why. Apparently, a few weeks after the memorial service, Emily visited his house in tears, claiming she was being misunderstood by the neighbors due to false accusations from her sister-in-law. And then, she and her mother moved into his place. Emily couldn't handle any household chores, leaving it all to her mother. But that wasn't the worst of it. My mother-in-law followed them around everywhere, constantly offering unsolicited advice while never contributing financially. She even planned to tag along on their honeymoon. It didn't stop there. Whenever Emily stepped away, her mother-in-law would make cutesy voices at her fiancé and cozy up to him. Fed up with their behavior, the fiancé called off the engagement. Initially, Emily and her mother-in-law threatened legal action. That's when the former fiancé of Emily's, David, stepped in. My parents did some digging, and it seems you've both been lying to me. If you're planning to sue, we will expose all your past behaviors in the appropriate setting. We will also talk to my brother and his wife, he said. Faced with this, Emily and her mother-in-law were at a loss for words. Hearing this story, I finally understood why they were so brazen that day. They probably thought getting married would absolve them of any of the local gossip. Emily had already quit her job, dreaming of a blissful married life. With the engagement off, she tried to get her job back. The company can't run without me, she often boasted, expecting a warm welcome. However, her return was flatly denied. This is what I heard from her coworkers, David continued. I had thought Emily was a high-achieving professional woman, but she was anything but. She made frequent mistakes and had no self-awareness, often blaming her colleagues. Pretending to be carefree, Emily often made insensitive remarks and was cruel to younger female staff behind their backs. When Emily showed up and asked for her job back, the victims spoke out one after another. A small Me Too movement erupted at the office, leading to Emily leaving the company in a fit of rage. After listening to the whole story, my husband said, "If your mother and sister are asking for compensation in the divorce case, I'll be happy to assist." But David immediately shook his head. No, I just came to say hello. I've heard you've been through a lot too. Glad you're doing better." We both deeply bowed our heads to David. Word around town is that mother-in-law and Emily are still living together in the same house, but apparently they're not getting along anymore. Kicked out of the company, and you're still useless. Trying to seduce my boyfriend, you old hag! They're constantly yelling at each other, I hear. We'd finished our move and even changed our phone numbers, so we were relaxed, perhaps too much so. Suddenly, we heard that Emily showed up at my husband's office. It was during lunch break, so he took her to a nearby diner. Right as she sat down, she started complaining. "Moving without telling us? That's so unfair," and then began to badmouth me, mother-in-law, and her ex-fiancé. She even said, "I'm sick of that home, let me move in with you." Of course, he immediately refused. Emily persisted. "Emma just doesn't get it. I'm pretty easygoing. We'll understand each other eventually." To which my husband responded, "My family consists of Emma. You're an outsider." As Emily began to retort, looking frustrated, my husband interrupted, "If you show up again, I'll call the police. Tell your mother as well," and quickly left to go back to work. I was so relieved that my husband stood firm against Emily that I hugged him from behind without thinking. It seems mother-in-law and Emily will continue to yell at each other while remaining inseparable bad buddies, and I quietly swore to myself to protect my own family.